Hi guys, this is the ASMR Nerd, and today I'm going to be doing a good old-fashioned, soft-spoken, ear-to-ear reading from a Skyrim book. This one right here. This is the Skyrim Library, Volume 1, The Histories. This is actually a different book from what you've seen in past. Previously, I've read from an Elder Scrolls Online lore book that talks about the world of the Elder Scrolls, all about Tamriel and its provinces, and we've also taken a look at the Skyrim Collector's Edition art book. We looked through the entirety of that, as a matter of fact. And I know there's a lot of you who enjoyed those videos with those Elder Scrolls books. And so I figured we'd take a look at this one. I got this one for Christmas, and it is one of 3, I believe, books available in the Skyrim Library series. So there are 3 volumes. There's this one, which is all about the history of Skyrim and Tamriel at large. And I honestly can't remember what the second one is, and I think the third one is books dealing with magic. And these are basically just compendiums of the books from within the game. So they're sort of giant flavor text compendiums, if you want to call them that. But the background and the history of the Elder Scrolls is so rich and so fleshed out and believable that it really makes reading these books a pleasure, in my opinion. So that's quite a bit of preamble. Let's open up the book and see what kind of tales we have inside. So we have here, of course, a map of Skyrim. It's the same map that comes with the game. All the holds of Skyrim. Whiterun, of course, Solitude, Morthal, the cities of Skyrim. Okay, so here we have the contents of the book. There's a large section dealing with history. section dealing specifically with Skyrim, and then a short section on the province of Morrowind, and finally a section all about dragons. I think I would like to start with the history, because I find some of that to be the most fascinating aspects of the Elder Scrolls universe. And actually the history here begins with a brief history of the Empire, which is interesting because it lays out the lives of the various emperors and empresses over the centuries. Reads sort of like a Roman history, detailing briefly the life of one after the next, but I'm looking for something a little bit more mythological in nature. I believe the 5 songs of King Wolfhearth might be interesting, as would be Ramanda, or Ramanada, sorry. I like the style of how that one's written, so. This is all brief history of the Empire. It's not really that brief, actually, as you can see. Although I suppose it does cover centuries of history. These are the 5 songs of King Wolfhearth. Which tells the story of a legendary king of Skyrim and a battle that takes place in Morrowind involving the god Lorcan and the tribunal of Morrowind. It's from the perspective of the Nords. Sure. Let's read Ramanada, which is a curious story that reads almost like something biblical. It's written in that fashion. It's interesting. Alright. Ramanada, Chapter 1. Sancretor and the birth of Reman. And in those days the empire of the Cyrodiils was dead, save in memory only, for through war and slug famine and iniquitous rulers, the west split from the east, and Colovia's estrangement lasted some 400 years, and the earth was sick with this sundering. Once worthy western kings of Anvil and Sarkal, of Balcreath and Dilodil, became through pride and habit as like thief barons, and forgot covenant. In the hard land things were no better, as arcanists and false moth princes lay in drugged stupor, or the studies of vileness, and no one sat on the throne in dusted generations. Snakes and the warnings of snakes went unheeded, and the land bled with ghosts and deep-set holes unto cold harbors. It is said that even the Kaim el-Adabal, the amulet of kings of glory, had been lost, and its people saw no reason to find it. And it was in this darkness that King Hrol set out from the lands beyond lost Twill, with a sortie of questing knights, numbered 18 less 1, all of them western sons and daughters. For Hrol had seen in his visions the snakes to come, and sought to heal all the borders of his forebears. And to this host appeared at last a spirit who resembled none other than Elestia, queen of ancient times, who bore in her left hand the dragon fire of the Akatosh, in her right hand the jewels of the covenant, and on her breast a wound that spilt void onto her mangled feet. And seeing Elestia and Kaim el-Adabal, Hrol and his knights wailed and set to their knees and prayed for all things to become as right. Unto them the spirit said, I am the healer of all men and the mother of dragons. But as you have run so many times for me, so shall I run, until you learn my pain, which renders you and all this land dead. And the spirit fled from them, and they split among hills and forests to find her, all grieving that they had become a villainous people. Hrol and his shield thane were the only ones to find her, and the king spoke to her, saying, I love you, sweet Eles, sweet wife of Shor and of Oriel, and the sacred bull, and would render this land alive again, not through pain, but through a return of the dragon fires of covenant, to join east and west and throw off all ruin. And the shield thane bore witness to the spirit opening naked to his king, carving on a nearby rock the words, And Hrol did love unto a hillock, before dying in the sight of their union. When the 15 other knights found King Hrol, they saw him dead after his labors against a mound of mud. And they parted each in their way, and some went mad, and the 2 that returned to their homeland beyond Twill would say nothing of Hrol, and act ashamed for him. But after 9 months, that mound of mud became a small mountain, and there were whispers among the shepherds and bulls. A small community of believers gathered around that growing hill during the days of its first churning, and they were the first to name it the Golden Hill, Sancretor. And it was the shepherdesses of Sediena who dared climb the hill, or the shepherdess, singular, the shepherdess Sediena, who dared climb the hill when she heard his first cry. And at its peak she saw what it had yielded, an infant she named Reman, which is light of man. And in the child's forehead was the Kaim el-Adabal, alive with the dragon fires of yore and the divine promise, and none dared obstruct Sediena when she climbed the steps of white gold tower to place the babe Reman on his throne, where he spoke as an adult, saying, I am Cyrodiil come. Chapter 2. The Chevalier Renaud, Blade of the Pig. I don't even know how to pronounce this word. And in the days of, I'm just going to say, interregnum, the Caim el Adabal was lost again amid the petty wars of gone heathen kings. West and east knew no union then, and all the lands outside of them saw Cyrodiil as a nest of snakemen and snakes. And for 4 more hundreds of years did the seat of Reman stay sundered, with only the machinations of a group of loyal knights keeping all its borders from throwing wide. These loyal knights did go by no name then, but were known by their eastern swords and painted eyes, and it was whispered that they were descended from the bodyguard of old Reman, which I must imagine would be the Blades. They take on Akaviri traditions, which would describe the reference to Eastern swords. One of their number, called the Chevalier Renaud, discovered the prowess of Cuchulainn? I don't know. And then supported him towards the throne. Only later would it be revealed that Renaud did this thing to come closer to Talos, and on Stormcrown, the glorious yet Emperor Tiber Septim. Only later still that he was under instruction by a pig. I don't know. Long Glory was wife to all the knights of the Dragon Banner, who knew no other and were brothers before beyond many seas, and now were brothers under the law, named the Blade Surrender of Pale Pass. And having vampire blood, these brother knights lived for ages through and past Reman, and then kept guard over his ward, the Coiled King, Versidue Shai. I have no idea who that is either. The snake captain Vershu became Renaud, became the protector of the northern west when the black dart was hooked into Severian Chorak. And then this is kind of neat. There's an editor's note here. The rest of this ancient book has been lost. So clearly there's more to this story. And it really starts to make very little sense after a point here. But again, I kind of like that, because real histories and real myths don't always make a lot of sense. And sometimes the meaning behind certain things is lost, and the veracity of certain things is lost over time. And so you get this feeling that maybe there was a mistranslation through the ages, or pieces of this were lost or misinterpreted, or just that there's way more going on here than we know or understand, or that at least I know or understand. There's just so much to this lore that, and there are people out there who, probably do know what this is talking about in its entirety. But the other thing that I really like about the way the lore of this game is presented is that you get it from different perspectives. If you read the lore from different races, so for instance, the Dunmer and the people of Morrowind tell a very different story about the same events that are covered in the 5 Songs of King Wolfhearth, which is told from a Nordic perspective. All this reference to shore, whereas others, including the Elven races, would refer to shore as Lorcan. So it's just different perspectives of same historical events and different interpretations. and that is very believable. It makes it seem very real. An abbreviated timeline of the Third Era. Perhaps not. This talks about the Battle of Red Mountain. All kinds of other things. Talk about Riemann in here somewhere. I don't think so. Maybe. Short life of Uriel Septim the Seventh. And Uriel Septim was emperor at the time of the Oblivion Crisis. And he was assassinated by the Mythic Dawn. And you have some interactions with him in Oblivion. Who's also central in the Daggerfall story. This is a very long story, whatever this was. I didn't actually notice. Well, why don't we read this here? The Dragon Break Re-Examined by Faldaroon. Off the top of my head, I don't know what the Dragon Break is, but it may... Oh, well, we'll find out together, won't we? Let's read about the Dragon Break. The late Third Era was a period of remarkable religious ferment and creativity. The upheavals of the reign of Uriel VII were only the outward signs of the historical forces that would eventually lead to the fall of the Septim dynasty. The so-called Dragon Break was first proposed at this time by a wide variety of cults and fringe sects across the empire, connected only by a common obsession with the events surrounding Tiber Septim's rise to power, the founding myth, if you will, of the Septim dynasty. The basis of the Dragon Break doctrine is now known to be a rather prosaic error in the timeline printed in the otherwise authoritative Encyclopedia Tamrielica, first published in the Third Era 12th year, during the early years of Tiber Septim's reign. At that time, the archives of Alinor were still inaccessible to human scholars, and the extant records from the Elysian period were extremely fragmentary. The Elysians had systematically burned all the libraries they could find, and their own records were largely destroyed during the War of Righteousness. I don't know about that either. The author of the Encyclopedia Tamrielica was apparently unfamiliar with the Elysian year, which the priesthood used to record all dates. We now know this refers to the length of the long vision trances undertaken by the high priestess, which might last anywhere from a few weeks to several months. Based on analysis of the surviving trance scrolls, as well as murals and friezes from Elysian temples, I estimate that the Elysian Order actually lasted only about 150 years, rather than the famous 1008 years given by the Encyclopedia Tamrielica. The mystery of the millennial plus ruler of the Elysians was accepted but unexplained until the spread of the Lorcan cults in the late Third Era, when the doctrine of the dragon break took hold. Because this dating and explanation was so widely held at the time, and then repeated by historians down through today, it has come to have the force of tradition. Recall, however, that the Third Era historians were already separated from the Elysians by a gulf of more than 2,000 years, and history was still in its infancy, relying on the few archives from those early days. Today, modern archaeology and paleonumerology have confirmed what my own research in Elysian dating first suggested, that the dragon break was invented in the late Third Era based on a scholarly error, fueled by obsession with eschatology and Numidianism. God, the Numidium. I don't even remember what that reference is, the Numidium. No, I don't remember. And perpetuated by scholarly inertia. So what we have here is an in-world piece written to be a critique of former works of history. And again, this is something that just adds so much depth to the lore, because you get this feeling of ages and years and myth reinterpreted and reinterpreted, and these sorts of, sort of like I was talking about actually with the previous reading, how these errors creep in, and so this is like an in-universe description of such an error in the scholarship of the time, and it just gives you this feeling of layers upon centuries and centuries, how these stories have been, interpreted and reinterpreted from different perspectives, by different races and cultures and at different times. The whole thing feels like Tolkien, in a lot of ways. This is just incredibly rich history. I don't think any other game comes close, honestly, to it's an organic feeling is what it is. It's this very natural history. Dancing Fire, perhaps? That one's pretty long. Let's read about the madness of Pelagius. And this will probably be our final reading, because this one is a little long. Okay. So, The Madness of Pelagius by Sathanes. The man who would be emperor of all Tamriel was born Thorius Pelagius Septim, a prince of the royal family of Wayrest, in the Third Era 119, at the end of the glorious reign of his uncle, Antiochus I. Wayrest had been showered by much preference during the years before Pelagius's birth, for King Magnus was Antiochus's favorite brother. And these emperors are covered in the brief history of the empire, and it describes the relationships here. But we won't worry about that too much right now. It is hard to say when Pelagius's madness first manifested itself, for, in truth, the first 10 years of his life were marked by much insanity in the land itself. When Pelagius was just over a year old, Antiochus died, and a daughter, Kintyra, assumed the throne to the acclaim of all. Kintyra II was Pelagius's cousin and an accomplished mystic and sorceress. If she had sufficient means to peer into the future, she would have surely fled the palace. The story of the War of the Red Diamond has been told in many other scholarly journals, but, as most historians agree, Kintyra II's reign was usurped by her and Pelagius's cousin Uriel, by the power of his mother, Potema, the so-called Wolf Queen of Solitude. And there's a quest in Skyrim where you defeat the spirit of the Wolf Queen. The year after her coronation, Kintyra was trapped in Glen Point and imprisoned in the imperial dungeons there. All of Tamriel exploded into Wayfair as Prince Uriel took the throne as Uriel III, and High Rock, because of the imprisoned Empress's presence there, was the location of some of the bloodiest battles. I said Wayfair, this should have been Warfare. That makes a lot more sense. Tamriel exploded into warfare. Pelagius's father, King Magnus, allied himself with his brother Sepphoris against the usurper emperor, and brought the wrath of Uriel III and Queen Potema down on Wayrest. Pelagius, his brothers and sisters, and his mother Euthyla fled to the Isle of Belfiera. Euthyla was of the line of Dureni, and her family manse is still located on that ancient isle even to this day. There is thankfully much written record of Pelagius's childhood in Belfiera, recorded by nurses and visitors. All who met him described him as a handsome, personable boy, interested in sport, magic, and music. Even assuming diplomats' lack of candor, Pelagius seemed, if anything, a blessing to the future of the Septim dynasty. When Pelagius was 8, Sepphoris slew Uriel III at the Battle of Ikidag and proclaimed himself Emperor Sepphoris I. For the first 10 years of his reign, Sepphoris battled Potema. Pelagius's first battle was the Siege of Solitude, which ended with Potema's death and the final end of the war. In gratitude, Sepphoris placed Pelagius on the throne of Solitude. As the King of Solitude, Pelagius's eccentricities of behavior began to be noticeable. I will interject here that there's a quest in Skyrim too where you go into the Pelagius wing of the Blue Palace, and that is so named after Pelagius the Mad. As a favorite nephew of the emperor, few diplomats to Solitude made critical commentary about Pelagius. For the first 2 years of his reign, Pelagius was, at the very least, noted for his alarming shifts in weight. 4 months after taking the throne, a diplomat from Ebonheart called Pelagius a hale and hearty soul with a heart so big it widens his waist. 5 months after that, the visiting princess of Firsthold wrote to her brother that the kings gripped my hand, and it felt like I was being clutched by a skeleton. Pelagius is greatly emaciated indeed. Sepphoris, or perhaps Sepphoris, I don't actually know, I'm going with Sepphoris, never married, and died childless 3 years after the Siege of Solitude. As the only surviving sibling, Pelagius's father, Magnus, left the throne of Wayrest and took residence at the imperial city as the Emperor Magnus I. Magnus was elderly and Pelagius was his oldest living child, so the attention of Tamriel focused on Sentinel. By this time, Pelagius's eccentricities were becoming infamous. There are many legends about his acts as King of Sentinel, but few well-documented cases exist. I thought it said that he was King of Solitude. Did it say he shifted to Sentinel somewhere in here? King of Solitude. I don't know. I might have just completely missed that. Anyway, there are many legends about his acts as King of Sentinel, but few well-documented cases exist. It is known that Pelagius locked the young princes and princesses of Silvanar in his room with him, only releasing them when an unsigned declaration of war was slipped under the door. When he tore off his clothes during a speech he was giving at a local festival, his advisors apparently decided to watch him more carefully. On the orders of Magnus, Pelagius was married to the beautiful heiress of an ancient dark elf noble family, Kataraya Ra'athim. Nordic kings who married dark elves seldom improved their popularity. There are two reasons most scholars give for the union. Magnus was trying to cement relations with Ebonheart, where the Ra'athim clan hailed, and Ebonheart's neighbor Mournhold had been a historical ally of the Empire since the very beginning. And the royal consort of Queen never sure if this is Berenzia or Berenzia, had won many battles, nothing legal about it, had won many battles in the War of the Red Diamond. Ebonheart had a poorly kept secret of aiding Uriel III and Potema. The other reason for the marriage was more personal. Kataraya was as shrewd a diplomat as she was beautiful. If any creature was capable of hiding Pelagius's madness, it was she. On the 8th of 2nd Seed, 3rd Arrow 145, Magnus I died quietly in his sleep. Joleth, Pelagius's sister, took over the throne of Solitude, and Pelagius and Kataraya rode to the imperial city to be crowned Emperor and Empress of Tamriel. It is said that Pelagius fainted when the crown was placed on his head, but Kataraya held him up, so only those closest to the thrones could see what happened. Like so many of Pelagius's stories, this cannot be verified. Pelagius III never truly ruled Tamriel. Kataraya and the Elder Council made all the decisions, and only tried to keep Pelagius from embarrassing all. Still, stories of Pelagius III's reign exist. It was said that when the Argonian ambassador from Blackrose came to court, Pelagius insisted on speaking in all grunts and squeaks, as that was the Argonians' natural language. It is known that Pelagius was obsessed with cleanliness, and many guests reported waking to the noise of an early morning scrub down of the imperial palace. The legend of Pelagius, while inspecting the servants' work, suddenly defecating on the floor to give them something to do, is probably apocryphal. When Pelagius began actually biting and attacking visitors to the imperial palace, it was decided to send him to a private asylum. Kateriah was proclaimed regent 2 years after Pelagius took the throne, and for the next 6 years the emperor stayed in a series of institutions and asylums. Traitors to the empire have many lies to spread about this period. Whispered stories of hideous experiments and tortures performed on Pelagius have almost become accepted as fact. The noble lady Kateriah became pregnant shortly after the emperor was sent away, and rumors of infidelity and, even more absurd, conspiracies to keep the sane emperor locked away ran amok. As Kateriah proved, her pregnancy came about after a visit to her husband's cell. With no other evidence, as loyal subjects, we are bound to accept the Empress's word on the matter. Her second child, who had reigned for many years as Uriel IV, was the child of her union with her consort Lariat, and publicly acknowledged as such. On a warm night in Sun's Dawn, in his 34th year, Pelagius III died after a brief fever in his cell at the temple of Kinnereth in the Isle of Bethany. Kateriah I reigned for another 46 years before passing the scepter on to the only child she had with Pelagius, Cassander. Pelagius's wild behavior has made him perversely dear to the province of his birth and death. The 2nd of Sun's Dawn, which may or may not be the anniversary of his death, records are not very clear, is celebrated as Mad Pelagius, the time when foolishness of all sorts is encouraged. And so, one of the least desirable emperors in the history of the Septim dynasty has become one of the most famous ones. And that is the story of Pelagius the Mad. One of many, many, many such stories in the Elder Scrolls lore. Well, I hope you enjoyed those readings today. They may have been a little bit strange, but that's what I love about the Elder Scrolls. The lore of the Elder Scrolls. Something about the strangeness, as I've said, makes it feel organic, believable, like real history. Real history is strange. If you did enjoy this, of course, feel free to leave a comment, or if you didn't enjoy it, you are, of course, also free to leave a comment. But if you'd like to see more of this, it's always good to hear from you. It's how I know what people are enjoying and what they aren't. Thank you very much for joining me here today for these readings. And I look very forward to having you back here next time. Bye for now.